This is a little lesson on embedding quotations into your writing. So when you're writing a paper and you're working with quotations, you probably already know that dropping a complete quote into a paragraph can be pretty awkward. When you do this, the quote might not match the flow of the paragraph, and oftentimes the reader has really no clue what the context of the quote is. Embedding quotations allows us to make the quotes fit our own voices as writers, and that's really important, especially now that you're writing at the 11th and 12th grade level. Each piece of quoted material in a paragraph must have a transition that gives the context and background for that quote. And that's what we've been doing, ever since 9th grade when we started working with quoting material in your writing. We've talked about setting the context first. So this is going to be the same, except then we're going to embed the quotes. I'm sorry, that noise in the background that you hear are my dogs wrestling, and I can't make them stop. So here's an example, and appropriately about my dog. Bobo, the fawn-colored boxer, only bites the vet when provoked. That's an example of a properly embedded quotation. You can see I set the context. We know who the quote is going to be about before we get to the quote. The quote is about Bobo. We also can learn that his color, he's a fawn-colored boxer, and so we have the context. And then the quote tells us the action, which is he only bites the vet when provoked. When an embedded quote is written properly, the reader should not be able to hear where the quotation marks are when the sentence is read aloud. A properly embedded quotation creates a seamless transition from the background information right into the quoted material. So Bobo, the fawn-colored boxer, only bites the vet when provoked. There's a nice seamless transition. You can't hear where those quotation marks are. When done poorly, however, the transition is choppy and incomplete, and it can be pretty predictable. So here's some poorly written examples. This is shown by, the vet held up her hand in pain after Bobo's bite. The next example is, Bobo really is a sweet little dog. Even his owner agrees, as she said in this quote. Bobo only bites when he is scared because he was not socialized as a puppy, but we're working on that. You can see in both of those examples that the transition doesn't set the context. It actually just mentions that a quote is coming. So, this is shown by, or as she said in this quote. Those are tools that we might have used in 9th and 10th grade, but we're really moving away from them now to work on really embedding the quotes and setting the context prior to that quote as the transition. Oh, and here's Bobo, just so you can see that he really isn't like a horrifying monster. We adopted him this summer. He was a year old. We adopted him from an elderly woman who had him and loved him, and she fell ill and was no longer able to take care of him. So now we have him. But yeah, he does bite the vet. All right, so let's talk about how to create a good transition into a quotation. The first thing that you need to do is you need to give the context for the quoted material. So you need to be able to inform the reader about what's happening and who is speaking, or it might even be, who's presenting these ideas and what the thoughts are. But you need to set the context, and the context is more than just writing this quote is going to tell you. You really want to avoid that and just give us a clear context with a smooth transition. Also, number 2, you only need to use the most important part of the quote. For a short paper, that would be ideally less than 10 words that you're quoting. That way you can embed that right into your own writing, as opposed to taking a very long quote and just dropping it right into the middle of your paragraph. For a long paper, ideally less than 3 typed lines. So when you're working with a 6 to 8 page paper, you might have some longer quotes, but ideally they would be less than 3 typed lines. For a pretty standard thesis paper or a response paper, that would be a short paper. That's where you're really looking at less than 10 words. Then after you write it, you want to read your sentence aloud. Can you hear the quotation marks? Because you shouldn't be able to. So here are some examples. According to Theodore Roosevelt, McKinley has the backbone of a chocolate eclair. You can't hear where those quotation marks begin and where they end, and that's how it should be. The next example says, Beneatha is a character who believes that people need to express themselves one way or another. Again, it's a nice transition, the context is set, we know that it's Beneatha, we know that it's her beliefs that we're about to hear, and that it transitions right into her beliefs. You can change the word tense if necessary and also omit unnecessary words and phrases. And to do this, you will use ellipsis and square brackets to indicate your changes. So let's look at square brackets. When changing words in a sentence, you need to indicate the change by placing brackets around the change in the word or the changed word itself. And notice that they're square brackets, they're not parentheses. Don't confuse the two. Let's say, for example, that I am writing a paper about Jack, who is very fond of unicorns. I also have a statement that someone said directly to Jack that I want to use in my paper, and that statement is, "You really like unicorns." However, this statement wouldn't flow well in my paper because it would read like this. Jack adores unicorns and draws them on all of his papers. One friend even says that he really likes unicorns. You can see and hear that that's not grammatically correct. So I'm going to use some square brackets to make the needed changes. Jack adores unicorns and draws them on all of his papers. One friend even says that he really likes unicorns. You'll see that I needed to change the word like to likes to fit grammatically within my own writing. So I put square brackets around the word likes so that the reader knows that that's not the original word, that I did have to make a change there. To omit words in the middle of a long quote, you're going to use the ellipsis, and some of you might call this the ... I'm going to give you the technical term. Here it is again, ellipsis. Here's an example. The unicorn only eats rainbows that are organic and colorful. Do not try to feed it anything else, as it will know the difference immediately. The lines in the middle were omitted because they did not include information that was needed to understand the proper feeding of unicorns. So I took them out. I'll back at that example so you can see it. I might also do this when the quote is very, very long and I really only need what's at the beginning and what's at the end of that quote to really make my point. Notice, however, even though I did omit a lot in between there and included the ellipsis, it still makes sense within the sentence. So, don't give me 3 words at the beginning, omit most of the quote, and then give me 3 words at the end that when put together make no sense. It still needs to read grammatically correct. So here are some examples of some embedded quotations done right. The truest form of wickedness on the island is evident in Roger. He demonstrates his true colors when, with a sense of delirious abandonment, he leaned all his weight on the lever. Well aware of the consequences, he willingly performs a dangerous action. Another example reads, Roger's actions clearly illustrate the depths children can sink to without appropriate supervision. As he stood high above Piggy on the mountain, Roger, with a sense of delirious abandonment, leaned all his weight on the lever. His willingness to welcome the moment with delirious abandonment demonstrates just how evil he had become. In the last example, Arthur was a born follower as a young man. Later in life, however, he became a brilliant leader. We're going to spend a lot of time working on embedded quotations in your writing. So don't worry if this sounds confusing at first. We're going to workshop this a lot. And, like I said, please always come to me if you have questions. And if you want to try something out and have me check it, I'm more than happy to do that. So this is, basic primer on embedding quotations.